Hey, what's up guys, it's Jace, and welcome to another exciting episode of the ELAV8 podcast. Today, it's Post and AB, and my co-host Sam and I dive into everything ranging from the TikTok ban to how the FTC has struck down non-competes, and lastly, we really explore mindfulness and the dangers of immediacy.
Like, I honestly want to dive into, things like the TikTok ban. We have the freedom of choice and the freedom to choose whether or not we want to participate in these social media networks. And for the first time in our history as a country, someone's deciding for us. And I find that to be a slippery slope.
So democracy needs to be a curated fish tank where you don't have a bunch of bad actors running around eating the other fish. So if actors are acting in ways that are completely counter to democracy in the way that they fundamentally run, do people in a democracy have to then cater to those bad actors?
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the ELAV8 podcast. I'm joined by my co-host Sam Messman, and this is take 2 of the intro because your boy messed up and he was recording from his AirPods instead of his microphone. And you know what? We're going to give this a round 2. Sam, how is Post and AB? How are you doing? And you can just do that whole little shenanigan thing again. And my apologies.
Well, Jace, and I haven't practiced this at all. I had a great NAB. It was fantastic. Look, it was like a high school reunion. I saw everybody I feel like that I've ever worked with in my entire life. It was just one conversation after the next. And but the coolest part, honestly, was that I literally had the smoothest, most gratifying experience I've ever had at an NAB, getting to work with the hedge team, who are just literally a bunch of genius engineers, which is a much different perspective than what I'm used to at NAB. So, Jace, you and I are workflow guys, and we'll try and find the hack that's going to save massive amounts of time and all of that stuff. But if you deal with a lot of engineers, and that company is all engineers, they approach problems in completely different ways that are equally as efficient, just efficient in different ways than you and I think about it, which is they'll think about how to design the booth optimally to avoid any and all Teamster issues and save massive amounts of money in terms of shipping in and out, or how to they arrive 2 days early so that they don't have a last minute Saturday build stress. So there was literally no stress whatsoever setting up, and they will sit there and they design a booth actually so they can make a smaller booth look bigger and look busier than any other booth on the floor. And there's a whole it's intentional the way that they did it. Very smart. Just being surrounded by engineering geniuses for a week while I got to talk with all my friends, it was very satisfying. But I'm curious, you were there too, and we recorded a podcast there with Colleen, but generally you were unaffiliated, so you got to just be a person attending the show. And what I'm really interested in knowing is how is it to just be a random attendee of NAB at this point?
Well, what's kind of funny is I've always been an attendee, right? I usually go to support my friends. I have a lot of YouTuber friends that are, amongst the people walking around the brands and stuff. So I generally get to tag along and just go see the inner workings of how these brands work and how their booths work. And it's always been great. But to answer your question relevant to this NAB, right, the reason why I was so excited, and I'm just going to, daisy chain off what you were talking about, is I feel like this NAB was all about connection, right? And it's the first time in a very long time that I felt that. And look, I say this with love, and I made a joke on the last podcast, which is I felt like I was watching a king holding court, right? And you're like, oh, stop it. You're like, stop it. But I want to chime in on that a little bit more, because when I saw you seeing your friends, right? Because that's what it was. It's so many people hadn't seen you in a while, and they just wanted to check in. How are you doing? What's up? What's new with you? And it was great. And I saw these almost quasi lines forming, right? Because everybody wanted to connect again. And so, that's a long roundabout way of saying is I genuinely feel that this NAB was the most important NAB that I've been to in a long time, because it was about connection. And I haven't felt that in a very long time.
But what's really weird about that though is
what?
I totally agree with you. And yet there were fewer community events at this show than I've ever seen at a show. It's all of the community events are dead. So I think people are so starved to talk to human beings, but there's like literally no place to do it outside of the show anymore, because all they've like literally murdered all of the community around the show. So it's happening now on the show floor, which is like just kind of fascinating.
Well, maybe this will be the incitement to bring it back, you know? Like, we have to remind ourselves, you know, we were locked inside for 2 years, right? And I don't know if you went to NAB the first year after it opened. Did you do that? Were you there the first year when it came back after the pandemic?
Yeah, it was weird.
It was weird, right? It was just so like, I don't even know how to describe it. It's almost like being inside a hospital, right? There was no medical equipment anywhere, but it was sterile, right? Like, it was very just drained of personality and the things that you and I crave, right? The authenticity, it was gone. And I don't know, like maybe, and this is probably me being naive or being hopeful, is like, I genuinely feel like after this year, like there's no excuse to bring that back.
It's got to come back in some way, because I frankly don't think the motto for these trade shows can continue without it for too much longer. I mean, there's really only so many, like, here's enterprise SaaS for you, and here's like how I extract your money this way, and would you like to talk to my sales guy? You know, like there's only so much of that I think people are willing to tolerate, to the point where it's people just start to say like, maybe I could just like hang out with my friends in another way, you know?
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing this actually as a universal trend across all trade shows, if you really think about it. Like E3 is done. It's gone, right? Which was the biggest, you know, or one of the biggest, you know, video game trade shows on the planet, and that no longer exists. And we look at companies like Apple who are taking a lot of their, you know, mainstream, you know, announcements, and they're filming them internally as a video, and you watch them at home. So there is a trend where the removal of community is becoming ubiquitous across all of technology, and it's kind of sad.
And I think Apple's got to get real careful about that too, because if you continue to like repel people and say we don't want you around, they'll stop coming around at a certain point.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. You push people away, at some point they'll get the hint, you know? The one thing, though, I feel pretty positive about is the developer industry as a whole. Developers tend to really, like, still focus on doing in-person meetups. Like, WWDC is really popular. You know, you have Google's, I feel like a dummy at the moment. I can't remember their name. Whatever their event is, but it's crazy to see everyone come together in that mindset. So I guess it kind of is attributed to the engineer mindset. You talked about that at the beginning, right? Is engineers love solving problems, coming together and figuring those things out. And there's a difference between doing that online versus doing that in person, where there's an objective. Like, I'm coming together to build this thing with you. Whereas where you go to a trade show like NAB, you're almost like, you know, in a mall shopping, right? You're just walking around window shopping the entire time.
Dude, you know what I think the NAB show floor is at this point? It's like literally the house is Vegas, right? So you enter the casino and you go to the poker table and everybody buys in. So they put their $50, $150, $250,000 down onto the table, right? And then the house is going to take that, right? And then what is everyone else trying to do? They're trying to make enough money from the people that have chosen to attend to justify the amount of money they've just given Las Vegas to be there. And that's like, so you're just literally, it's a bunch of poker players playing with each other, trying to extract money on that show floor. And in this day and age, I find it all to be a pretty bizarre model. I just feel like there's a better way to do this.
I mean, taking what you just said, right, and this could once again be me being naive, I think if you do everything you talked about at the beginning, and if you inject community back into it, right, you can almost like create these lifelong customers, right? Because let's be real, one of the reasons why you and I love Final Cut so much is not because it's a great program, which I think we both agree on, but it was that community aspect that brought us all together, where every time we were in that program, we had a relationship with the program because we had relationship with other people that we knew that were using it.
Totally, 100%. You know, and there was, I think, a significantly larger, more integrated Apple creative community, a bunch of years back. And it has really faded at this point, to the point where I think, because people don't know where to go anymore. There's not really a place to go to connect that way anymore. So, right now it's happening on the show floor, but there's this underlying like deep desire, I think, that everybody has for connection, because like, to be honest, it's just not as satisfying talking to people over Zoom. It's just not.
Yeah, speaking of which, and I love doing these with you. Can I just tell you, being in person with you again, like I realize that you and I have like a 3 to 4 month cycle. Somehow we run into each other because we're like at an event or, something. It's like, man, it's actually probably closer to 4 to 5 months, but we run into each other and it's great. And that connection that you and I shared at the event is like the whole reason why I wanted to go. I didn't have, like pressing matters to bring me there. I'm glad I did. I met with some partners at my television network. It was really good for me to go, and I'm glad I did. But I will say this, and this is kind of off topic. Probably my favorite thing at that entire show was you teaching me how to play craps. That was incredible.
And we lost money, dude. We lost, which next time we have to get beginners to come play with us, and then it's going to go well. But it's about building the vibe. But yeah, dude, I agree. Like, it's fun. If I just had to sit there and talk to prospective clients all day long, I'd go crazy. But, getting to connect with you and the hedge guys and all of the people around the industry and being like, that makes all of this worthwhile versus just having like some weird job where you talk to a bunch of tire kickers. Nobody wants to do that. Like, you want to talk to people who are enthusiastic about the things that you're enthusiastic about, and that's how cool things happen. That's how cool things come from the show. So, I'm somewhat curious on your end, like, what do you think, where is all of this going, trend wise, and where do you see the industry headed, and what do you think people actually, what would be cool from a connection standpoint, in terms of moving forward? Where do you, like, we've seen all of the stuff from the past 15 years. I think it's got to be different. So what do you want now? What is the event that you would want to actually see versus the ones we have?
So, I mean, the reality is it's all about niche communities, right? And if we like take a step back and we look at other things, right? Like, what would be a good example of this? Dungeons and Dragons. We're going to use Dungeons and Dragons, right? Those communities are incredible. They come together, they sit around a table, and they play board games. They usually meet up at a location like a comic book store, right? And they play, and it's like something they celebrate and they love, together. And I really feel like we need to re-amplify these niche communities. And we've kind of started doing this thing where we're funneling everything into the big brands. And I'll give you another example of this, right? And I don't have a problem with Adobe, so this isn't a shot across the bow at Adobe. But, Adobe's picking off like all these smaller companies and they're consolidating them. And because they're consolidating them, it is removing some of that niche romanticism amongst those community members because they're being absorbed into this behemoth, right?
Yeah.
And what I genuinely believe is that we need to take that vertical integration and we need to break it apart. And we need to start focusing more so on the niche communities and creating environments for them. And I'm a broken record about this. And, you go every year, almost every year, is the Final Cut Pro Summit, right? Or the Creative Summit. I always mess up the name of it. And one of the reasons why I love going to that is not to learn something about Final Cut. If I need to learn something about Final Cut, I'll usually just Google it or I'll call you. Sam, I'm struggling with something. You got me in like 30 seconds. You didn't even send me a video. You just tell me and I got it. The reason why I go is I want to sit with other people that love that program. And so what I think what would be best to finally answer your question is if these big brands could figure out how to, one, locate and identify their community and create these micro events specifically for them.
So a more boutique style, because I think Adobe tries to address that with like Adobe Max, right? And they want the the Adobe Religious Revival, right, where they're going to have the thing and the big, flashy, which I think is effective. I wouldn't say they shouldn't do Adobe Max, and in a lot of ways, that's what Apple does with WWDC. But I think, to your point, there's a certain thing about all of the community events that happen around that, or the smaller things where people actually, when you're at a giant event, do you ever really feel like you're connected to the other people at it, in a real way? No.
No.
You'd much rather be at the smaller shows,
Well, you and I are very similar, right? We kind of like hang back and we watch, right? And we pick and choose like the interactions that we watch, like that we want. And at a larger event, you and I have a harder time integrating ourselves because we're just sitting and just like kind of like taken by the spectacle of the whole thing. And I'm not using spectacle as like a beautiful thing. I'm just saying it's literally a spectacle.
Yeah, I don't enjoy it for the most part, like when you're at a concert or whatever, it might as well just be another screen, unless you're there and having a communal experience with the band or a smaller set of musicians and things like that, So I am far more interested in custom sort of boutique, interesting experiences than I am impressed by how much money you can throw up on a screen, or how many roadies you have attending to your thing, or how many people watched your thing. Like, I don't care, because those are numbers on a screen versus what is the experience that you're going to create or curate for a group of people. That's just where I'm more interested these days.
What's funny is I can bring this back full circle back to craps. All right. Because we passed the machines, the craps machines.
Oh,
and I thought we were going to sit down on that because, I wanted to learn and I didn't want to be at the table. And you go, no, we're going to the table. It's all about the vibes, right? So if you're a reductionist person, right, and you just look at what you're talking about, the foundation of who is Sam Messman. Sam Messman is about vibes and community, right? And never wants to play at the crap machines. He wants to play at the crap table. Sorry, I had to bring that back full circle.
Well, look, it's true. But if you think about this, right, like, why on earth would you go play in a casino on a practical level? This is not in any way, shape, or form a good investment. For the most part, you're going to lose. All. Like, so if fundamentally you're going to lose going in there, and just think about fundamentally what sitting at a slot machine is, especially if you're doing it by yourself. You literally sit down and you go like this until either you get a lot of money, which is rare, or until your money's gone and you go to a different machine. And that's just how you chose to spend your interaction. Whereas you can go with a group of people to a table where they throw dice together. If you get on a hot table, there's nothing more fun in the world, especially people who've never played before. And you go around and you cheer everybody on and you try and beat the house. And if you lose, you're like, fuck, I lost. Okay, that money was gone when I put it down on the table. But if you win, you're like, that was the coolest thing ever, and what an amazing vibe, and you got to do that with people that you like. So, it's the social experience. If you're going to go to Vegas in a casino or do any of those things, I don't understand why you would choose the solitary environments or the machine-based games, because there's just you're gonna lose, and it's not fun.
Yeah, I will say this: I've never had that much fun losing before in my entire life. Just sitting next to you, and and by the way, we did get hot. I don't want everybody to think we just lost. No, we got 2 drinks at a casino table, which, if you know anything about Vegas, that's a long amount of time. It's not like we were in and out. We were there for a good amount, so had a great time. But I don't know. The metaphor of losing at the house is starting to get me in my head about everything that's happening in the world. And what we tend to do is start talking about what's happening. Man, are you paying attention to what
it is? A mess, dude. It is seriously a problem. It is. I don't know. What is your impression of just the dumpster fire that's going on in the world? We can pause an NAB and just be like, there's a lot of things going on here.
Yeah, and I feel like people know about NAB, right? We talked about it on the last podcast. like I honestly want to dive into like, things like the TikTok ban, right? Which is, if you really think about it, like that's kind of crazy. Like I don't feel like people fundamentally understand what's happening with that. And I kind of want to touch on it. Like,
so what is
first
fundamentally happening? Let's not bury the lead. Let's just go right into it.
Okay, well, first of all, like there's this thing called freedom of speech, right? Right, our First Amendment right. All right, and where does that stop? Does it stop because another country owns that platform? That's the first question I have for you. Does freedom of speech stop when another platform owns the platform? How does that work?
Well, I mean, I would say that where we are now is I think everybody has freedom of speech, but the way it gets modulated is depending on what you're saying, they put you in a smaller and smaller room with fewer and fewer people.
Mm-hmm. Wait, say that again, but say it differently. I'm really gonna take this in, like, because that was nice.
So think about it like this, right? So you can say whatever you want now, but the algorithm has been designed where depending on what you say, it's going to turn down the volume on it in terms of who it shows it to. So you ever see that Black Mirror episode where like at a certain point, the person's been like essentially canceled where they can't access people anymore through the device? Yeah. And in a lot of ways, I think that's kind of what's happening in terms of free speech. Like you can say whatever you want, but you can't expect it to actually get distributed anywhere.
Okay. So now we're talking about the algorithm at the end of the day, right? And I'm sorry, you sent me down a rabbit hole because I haven't thought about this before, right? You're almost like talking about the dead internet theory to a degree. It's like how many actual people are seeing what I'm talking about, right? How far is my message reaching? Is there as many users on this platform as claimed, right? Or as you're kind of suggesting more succinctly, is this echo chamber just becoming more and more constricted? And I have the illusion of free speech because I'm put in a box that I'm not even aware of.
I think everybody does have free speech. I think the assumption that your social media is going to work the same for all types of speech is completely an illusion. Okay.
All right, well, let's talk about the data for a second, because like kind of what you were talking about now gets me to the data, right? Because what's being claimed by the United States government and all the people that are voting on this bill is that our data is not protected, right? They're trying to protect us. It's not that, they're trying to stop an entity from, I guess, poisoning our minds. It's more so is like we have to protect data. We have to protect our populace from having their data leaked, right? To some degree. There's many other issues, but that's what I'm going to focus on right now.
Well, they only want it leaked certain places.
Exactly. All right, because like Facebook, there's a major data breach that happened. What was that credit? It was Accenture. It was some major credit where everybody's social security number was leaked, and it was all over the dark web. I feel like a dummy. I can't remember the name of it. Everybody uses it, but that was leaked, right? And like AT&T, all their customer data was leaked. All these companies that I could go down this list of, essentially what I'm trying to drive at is that they're still in business. They don't have the same demands that this foreign entity has. And I'm not trying to protect a foreign business. I'm a patriot. That's not what this is about. What it is about is that I know a lot of people that love and enjoy this platform, whether or not they're getting their free speech, as we've now discussed, or not, is actually inconsequential. Is that they've chosen this platform. We live in the United States where freedom of choice, freedom of capitalism, and all of these things that are tenets of being an American are being eroded based on the fact that someone in Singapore owns it.
Now, the flip side of that, though, is to what extent is Instagram allowed to be used in China?
Oh, dude. Well, I mean, you're right. It's still omnidirectional. Like social media, 1000% is constrained in those parts of the world.
So the question is, to what extent, if they get to constrain us, why do we need to cater to them?
Well, I mean, what it boils down to is just, policy, right? It's political policy, right? That's a communist territory where we're, I'm doing this in air quotes, we're a democracy, right? Like, I honestly want to dive into like, things like the TikTok ban, right? Which is, if you really think about it, like, that's kind of crazy. And in our democracy, we have the freedom of choice and the freedom to choose whether or not we want to participate in these social media networks. And for the first time in our history as a country, someone's deciding for us. And I find that to be a slippery slope.
It 100% is. I think it's, if you think about it from our government's perspective, they're like, well, how come China gets to censor everything that we do? But yet we have to like play nice for them to make sure that whatever they're putting out gets messaged properly. That's called a bad abusive relationship, right? So there's, from a government perspective, that's one thing. But then the flip side is when you look at the way social media is clearly being run and organized, it's very clear that there is an agenda in terms of which speech is promoted and which speech isn't on the platforms that we're allowed to use, which are currently more or less all of them. So, but the question is, if you are being limited by a government that does not have your best interests in mind, and you're being unfairly competed against, right? It'd be like going to the Olympics, right? And on the one side, you'd say, hey, this team, you're going to be able to fight with both hands, and other team, you fight with one hand, right? Is that fair?
I mean, basically, you're describing what Russia did with the doping, right? They got oxygenated blood and they passed all their drug tests when they were, in Sochi? That was crazy. Yeah. But no, you're right. No, it is an unfair advantage. But, I mean, that is a disadvantage to democracy to a degree. And look, I'm not saying anything about democracy. Like, I love democracy. You know me very well. But there are aspects that put us at a disadvantage because you have to win hearts and minds to move in unison towards a unified goal, right? Whereas China can just dictate it. They can just be, no, this is what we're doing, and you don't have a choice in the matter.
Well, let's try and solve the problem then, right? Because at a certain point, democracy only works if people buy into it, right? And what's good is that you have a diverse sense of opinion. So maybe when it comes to a democracy, you could be able to make the rule of, well, hey, if you're going to censor or do these things, you therefore are cut out from the benefits of democracy because you choose to operate in a way that is fundamentally undemocratic. So that would be the way that I would solve the problem, is either it's democratic because everybody involved is being democratic. Let me phrase it to you like this, right? I've learned this over the years, like companies or places that you work with, they're like fish tanks, right? And if you've ever seen a fish tank where they put the wrong fish in the fish tank, that fish eats the other fish, right? So democracy needs to be a curated fish tank where you don't have a bunch of bad actors running around eating the other fish. So if actors are acting in ways that are completely counter to democracy in the way that they fundamentally run, do people in a democracy have to then cater to those bad actors?
For some reason, you made me start thinking about eminent domain, right? Like through that little tangent you were going on, because, right? I mean, that's kind of like our weapon against what's happening at the moment, whether it be farmland that we seized from China in Arkansas. Did you see that story?
No.
Oh yeah, we basically kicked the Chinese out of farmland in Arkansas. What's the governor, Sarah Huckabee? She just came in and said, no, that's our farmland now. Right. And the reason why that you what you just sent me down in my head, right, is you're talking about the big fish eating, the other fish. And, if we were to transcribe that and transpose it to something like capitalism, right, the best product will win, the best market fit will win. And if we further transpose it into now what I'm going to call the digital eminent domain, right, the government is now the big fish. And they're coming in and saying, hey, you won't let us use our social media networks in your country, so we're not going to let you use yours and ours. Is that kind of what you're basically talking about? Is this new form of digital eminent domain?
Reciprocity, man.
Reciprocity. Yeah, I've never been able to successfully say that word until just now. So thank you. I watched your lips and I was able to do it. So thank you. So yeah, man. By the way, I guess to get a little bit more on topic in like our wheelhouse, because we like to tease a little bit of like political stuff that's happening with our puppet masters, etc. But the thing I actually want your opinion on, because it does kind of affect us to a degree, is what's happening with the non-competes. Did you see about this? What just happened with the FTC and how they basically just, that's no longer a thing.
I mean, I think it's awesome. Honestly, so like you sent it to me and I was like, this is I can't believe our government did something good for the average person, right? So because the way a lot of companies do use these, right, is they'll hire you and then they can hold it over your head to basically say like, I don't want you, if you leave, you can't work, or you essentially can't make a living with a bunch of other companies if you leave the company that you're with, right? So you're stuck there for a given amount of time and then they kind of own you. So if you are, it is a power dynamic that is then created, which I think is of questionable value. So that's my like view on it, which is like, wow, how did that get through the, who let that one pass the goalie is kind of my reaction.
Yeah, I mean, I looked at it and I had kind of the same impression immediately. And then, how my mind works, I was trying to figure out, how are they trying to trick me? Right? I literally was thinking, what is the downside to this? And I couldn't think of one, because if you really think of it, it protects the little guy. The little guy now has, better choices, right? And the thing that I immediately started thinking about is it's going to drive companies to have better incentives for good employees. Right? Because if they don't, they'll go somewhere else. Right? So maybe there'll be better comp packages. Maybe there'll be better, better company retreats. Because in the blockchain industry, for example, I mean, that's highly competitive. And if you're a good blockchain developer, people want to hold on to you like their life depended on it, because they're so expensive these days. Right? But within all of those proprietary protocols, right? Whenever you come into those ecosystems, generally they try to handcuff you to that protocol, being like, hey, we recognize that you worked on ERC20 contracts. You can't work on another ERC20 contract for X amount of time, right? So it kind of keeps those employees tethered into those ecosystems. And I don't know, I'm really excited about it from a technological point of view, because I feel like this is the most pro-developer thing I've seen happen in decades.
Well, maybe I'll just throw out a theory. It's based on nothing. But what if people are waking up to the idea that things are getting so bad and bureaucratic and ridiculous in our country, where we might be on the verge of losing it if we don't start doing the right thing again. And so there's almost no other choice at this point but to start using common sense and problem solving to approach problems. And I think in many cases our government might be running out of excuses, where they might be forced to start operating because they have existential threats all around them. So they have to start, it's either do the right thing or it's going to go down.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely 100% completely agree with you. And, this is a politically neutral statement. It's just that, we talk about inflation often, right? I feel like underneath any administration, it would be bad right now, whether Republican, Democrat, doesn't really matter. COVID got us here. We had
Jace,
to print
the economy's great, man. Did you read that? Everything's great in the economy. That's what they keep
you're
saying.
talking about the jobs report. You're talking about all those
going
top
so
line.
Great. Economy's great. Envy of the world. Sorry, I didn't mean to go. Carry on.
No. I'm glad you talked about that, right? I actually am glad. And the reason why I'm glad is this is just how you hide lies within statistics, right? They've completely changed the inflation metrics, right? And they focused on things that don't apply to normal human beings, right? Like food, right? They've removed like everyday usable items from how they calculate inflation, right? Because if they did like put those numbers inside, the inflation report. What's the inflation report called? I feel like a dummy at the moment. It's not called that. I'm just making that name up. It's called the consumer price CPI report, the consumer price index. All right. They've remanipulated the data to only focus on things that will make inflation seem like it's not going up. And it is, right? And here's what's crazy, Sam, because I have to give you full credit on this, is you got me really into the history of finance. It's not as finances as they are. You know, I've always been into financial markets, etc. But I started looking at interest rates because I was really curious about like how interest rates in the past had combated inflation. And what I discovered, especially during like Jimmy Carter's administration transitioning into Reagan, right? Reaganomics, trickle down economics. I'm not here to discuss whether or not that worked, but I am here to discuss like what happened, right? We had high inflation, right? And the only way they could combat it was raising interest rates. We're at a time where raising interest rates is almost impossible. So my question for you, Sam, because interest rates are already high, right? We have no arrows in our quiver left. How do we combat this for the average American going into the next election cycle?
Well, I think, do you want the actual truth of what I think, how you combat it?
Yeah.
I think the only way, in my opinion, to combat this is with a new idea, which is fundamentally looking at the way that we manufacture things and run society and becoming significantly more efficient with it. So it's very clear that there are documented ways to run a farm. They just aren't how Monsanto wants you to run a farm. There's very clear ways on how to manage resources. It's just not in the best interest of the people who have those resources. There's very clear ways to deal with illness in this country, and that used to work a lot better. They're just not in the fundamental interests of health insurance companies or pharmaceutical companies. So if we actually really want to, what's my advice to people is to stop using systems that are designed to not serve them and start using systems that are, stop being consumers and start being sustainable and stretching the life of things longer and like really getting smarter about where everything in your life comes from and the way that you spend your money, and removing things that don't actually make any sense or fundamentally are designed to bankrupt you. And that's the only way.
Huh. So okay, I'm going to translate that. I'm going to read it back to you. Do you feel like society has become too focused on immediacy? And the reason why I'm asking that is basically what you just talked about is like if we spend an extra few minutes researching the products, like this shirt I'm wearing, where it came from, how it was made, or research my food, how it was made, where it came from, or I focused on creating a new
one step further. Do you know how many people are just using Grubhub versus just going down and picking up their food, and how much money they lose on every charge to have somebody? And those companies aren't even profitable, right? But what was wrong with just ordering your food and picking it? Was that broken, going and like takeout versus having these systems in between that transaction? Like, what was broken there? So the inefficiency just in that whole model right there, the Uber Eats model, like, let's start there. Or like, that's kind of what I'm talking about.
Yeah, and that's kind of why I'm pulling on this thread, right? Because if you're like a reductionist about it and you're honest with yourself, is it feels like immediacy is our downfall in every regard, right? Whether it be like spending more money than you should and living without, outside of your means because it costs you an extra $300 a month because you won't go to the grocery store, possible, right? Or, not researching the food you're actually putting into your body because you don't feel like you have the time to cook a healthy, nutritious meal for yourself. I mean, basically what you just said was so profound because I can minimize it to one statement, which is the one I just made. Yeah, mindfulness. So you think, and to bring it back full circle because I don't want to drift too far away, is that to fix the economy, to fix our country, to fix the people within it, that we need to practice more mindfulness?
I mean, yeah, imagine what would happen if we did, right? Like, instead of like going every time with your paycheck to the payday loans place where they're going to keep a whole bunch of money from your paycheck that then you're going to, because like like you're always robbing Peter to pay Paul, right? So you're basically like, I need this paycheck. So people live paycheck to paycheck. Then they bring it to the check cashing place to get the money that they don't have, that they barely make it through the next couple of weeks. Meanwhile, that check cashing place is taking an astronomical amount of money from like what you would have had. So you just get, it's like we have to get out of the company store mentality of like, like when people work the coal mines, right? The coal miners owned the company store. And so they knew how much everyone was making, and they charged enough for items so that the average person would just get further and further in debt to the company store, which would mean they would have to work at the coal mine longer because they owned all of the essential means of production. And so they knew they had you, and then the people would come in and spend the money, and it was all by design, right? And so I think we have a little bit of that mentality these days. And I think if we started looking at renewable ways to extend the lives of the things that we already had, and just smarter ways of doing everything versus like outsourcing literally everything that we do, we might find that our money went a lot further.
Yeah. The one thing that I'm curious about, though, right, and I'm going to put my old man hat on, is like, I'm finally at that age where I'm always thinking about taxes, right? When I was a kid,
Dude.
I never used to think about taxes, but like now I'm really starting to pay attention. How do you do what you just said, right? To stretch your money further when, the current administration is literally, as of today, talking about, one, raising capital gains taxes, raising taxes for the middle class, as well as, this wouldn't affect you and I because we're not billionaires, but also creating unrealized gains tax, right? So what I'm getting at is that the money that's coming out of our paycheck isn't going down. It's only going up. And with inflation, which we talk about regularly, is only increasing.
But you asked for a question. You asked for an answer to the question. So what's going to remember my point earlier, which is like at a certain point, the people in charge, there's going to be an absolute revolt it's blood from a stone at a certain point. So they're going to have to flip the script and start doing the right things, or they just like, this will become unsustainable. We will lose the whole thing. They cannot keep taking from a well that's not there. So fundamentally, I'm less worried about the taxes coming because like nobody can afford them. It's blood from a stone. So the only way to address this is creating a viable system where things get done the right way. Like, that's the only way this works. You cannot continue to mismanage this and expect to dig yourself out of it.
Yeah, and by the way, I understand what you're saying, and I completely agree with it. But something that I'm fearful of, and I just don't understand, is it would be one thing if it was just America, right? And we were watching and witnessing what's happening here, and it was more so like isolated. But I'm studying inflation across other countries, and I'm studying tax increases across other countries. I mean, what's happening in Canada with their tax system is actually terrifying. It's going up, and they already have one of the highest tax brackets on the planet. So this is not it's not an isolated event, right? It's a seismic event that's happening across the planet. And my question is why?
Inflation, man. And look, in the end, what are the human needs that we have to solve for, which is like food, water, shelter. So think about this, right? Yep. Compton is a perfect example of this. So we ran this just unbelievable program out in Compton where we taught kids financial independence, how to grow their own food, and how to make movies. And that was during the pandemic. And as part of that, I learned something really interesting when we went to the local sustainability center. And I really wish I could remember his name right now because I don't want to take credit for the things that he said and told me. But like, it was fascinating to find out. Did you know, do you know what a food desert is?
Mm-mm.
So a food desert is when there is no nutritional food in an area. And so Compton is a food desert, and all of the supermarkets there are secondhand supermarkets. So basically, they get all of the leftover produce from the good supermarkets, right, in the wealthy areas. Here's the interesting part. Did you know that Compton is literally sitting on the most its soil has more earthworms per capita, according to the person that I talked to, than any other place in the country, which means a food desert is literally sitting on the most fertile soil in America. And the absurdity of that, the absurdity of how easy it would be for the average person to grow their own food versus paying $7 for an apple at Whole Foods is insane. And when you think about the amount of money that people spend on landscaping, what would happen if the average place's landscaping budget was put into actually growing food on the American lawn versus growing the least useful plant in America, which is a green grass, right? Just start right from there. Like, would anyone be hungry after that?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I really can't argue with that. I mean, why aren't we doing this? You know, like everything you're saying makes sense to me, but why are we not? You know, like that's my next question.
Because there's too much money in perpetuating the system we have.
Yeah.
Think about how much money is tied up in you going to the grocery store where they don't even want to pay the people manning the grocery stores. They want to hide all of the stuff behind and just digitize wonderlands, right? You know, but like the truth of the matter is, like, why wouldn't we just grow stuff on our lawns? It's because we're lazy.
I mean, everything you just said about like hiding like goods, right, is starting to actually scare me. Right. And I don't want you to gloss over it. So if you take a step back just for a moment, I would love to get your opinion on how they're locking everything behind glass in major cities. And I actually was reading.
Well, they have to because it's, you know, getting stolen. Right. So but they're creating that problem because it's not affordable and the supply chain isn't working and you're preventing people from making a living and you're not giving them any jobs or sustainable things. And then what do desperate people do? They go and take what they need to take, right? So until you adjust the system so that it is sustainable, like you can put all the stuff, you can close all the stores you want, but then you've just really just destroyed a once functional city and turned it into a dysfunctional, like post-apocalyptic nightmare for really no good reason outside of the fact you can't afford to take, you are uninterested in taking care of your own citizens.
Yeah, I feel like this is a podcast that's akin to Freakonomics. I don't know if you ever read that book and like how like little micro decisions affected like mass events within our society. But I mean, what you're talking about, I mean, I'm seeing it in my head. It's like the lever of cost of living going up is increasing crime, and it feels like it is directly correlated. So what happens though when we start choking the ability for people to easily access these goods? You know, like what happens next? Do they start retreating from these stores and brands and start going into people's homes? Is that next? Is that the next line of defense?
I hope not. That's going to be real. Like it's diminishing returns, right? You know, because then what happens is then like you get a police state, right? Because then what happens, right, is they segregate. You know, they put they separate the haves from the have-nots. Mm-hmm. And you create two different worlds, right? And that's not going to be good. So you have to find a way to create literally something sustainable for everybody involved. And you know, it's not like we don't have the technology. We know how to do this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Man, Sam, what else should we talk about, man? You're sending me down these little like things, and you text me a couple things you wanted to talk about today, but I've lost them at the moment. I don't
know. We got way far off of the how's NAB?
NAB was great. It was great. Yeah.
NAB was great. Look, and dude, it was great to see you, and it was great to see everybody. But actually, we could talk about this too, which is there was a 10% smaller crowd there, but I think we're 30% more exhibitors, right? So
what?
Weird. that's the numbers I heard. And someone please correct me if that's inaccurate, but there is 10% fewer people with like 10 to 30% more exhibitors. And so you have a wider network of people going after a smaller segment. And I feel like that's encapsulating what I just said. We have to find a way to make more people who can afford to be at the party, right? Like the pie has to get bigger, not smaller.
I mean, look, you experienced it with me. It cost $20 for a bottle of water, right? Like, this was the most expensive NAB I've ever been to. I stayed at the Stratosphere, and I spent way more money than I'd like to admit. I was like, what? This shouldn't cost that much.
It's crazy, man. Like, it's crazy. Yeah. And also, I'm going to give the nod to Hedge. They are very, very smart about how they spend their money, and they did a lot of smart things. And I ended up having to stay at the Airbnb, and it was actually cool. I got to hang out with a bunch of guys, and get to hang out with the team, and it was cool. But okay, so you could buy a water bottle from or spend $5 on a coffee at the place, or you could go a little bit off somewhere in a car and pick up a whole bunch of stuff for the entire team and bring it there. Which one is smarter, right? And what is the better way to do things? So if you think about corporate per diem accounts and corporate things and how they spend money in all of these places, that stuff stretches further, less and less far. But if you think about smaller companies, the way that you can compete with that is just literally being smarter and stretching your money more tactically. I mean, people used to clip coupons. We don't have physical coupons anymore, but there's ways to do this. There's ways to navigate it if you're smart and you know how to hustle. And I think that's where the solution is, at this point. And, people are going to have to learn how to be smarter and do more with less, and also in a lot of ways get outside of the predatory economy.
Mm-hmm. I mean, this just brings it back, to what we were talking about at the beginning, is that, reductionism, consolidation, and being, more aware of being more, what was it? Mindful. You were just talking about being more mindful. That's the reductionist principle that we all need to try to chase at the moment. And I'm sitting here just listening to everything you're talking about and thinking, how can companies be more mindful? How can individuals within those companies be more mindful? How can editors, as we were talking about at NAB and on that podcast, how can they be more mindful of how to solve these problems? And I think that's the universal theme that I'm really going to take internally going forward is how can I be more mindful? How can I do better work? And how can I have a better life just by, I guess, seeking less immediacy?
Well, I'm not going to tell you anything that I isn't a problem for me and advice I don't follow, but doing fewer things better is fundamentally more satisfying, and putting your time into fewer places that have higher ROI. And for the non corporate nerds, it's return on investment. Where do you get the highest return on investment for what you do? And I see a lot of people trying to do a million things and taking a million jobs and doing a lot of things not very well versus doing a few things really, really well and focusing on those and where they solve problems, and putting your time into buckets that you're who are your great clients? And I see a lot of people, if you're a pro editor, what if you put 30% more time into your great clients and less time into your problematic clients? And I guarantee you would start finding better clients and more of them because you were able to serve your good clients better, and gradually your bad clients would fall by the wayside.
Yeah. I'm thinking about what you're talking about and realizing I probably should take your advice, because you kind of know what I do, right? Literally, it's my job to be the everyman, right? To literally take on as many jobs as possible and solve problems, right? Is to be a jack of all trades. So you got any advice for me personally?
Which you can do, right? But do you have to be the jack of all trades for your company all the time, or can you just do them in batches?
Well, I guess that's fair. No, you just actually kind of nailed it on the head. That's more of what I do. Yeah. So I'll have one. So for example, they'll be like, Jace, we need you to build a an application. So I'll build an application for like 3 weeks. And like, okay, now we need you to do a security audit for like, paperwork to show that we have the ability to do content security. Like, okay, I'll do that. So maybe you just nailed it. I just need to be more batch focused.
Like, do one thing, do it really well, then get on to the next thing and do that, because like, look, the reality is like, it's not that you don't know how to do things. You know how to do a ton of things, which is a great skill to have. It makes you immensely valuable in an organization. But humans by nature, like, we might say that we're multitaskers, and maybe my wife is, but like, I'm not. Like, I find when I try and do a few things at a time, I do all of them not great. So I try and have multiple things going, but I give like my full attention to the thing that I'm doing in that moment. And then I do that with a variety of different things versus, and that's been a change, right? I used to feel like, oh, I'll give 10 minutes to this, 10 minutes to that, 10 minutes to this. Mm-hmm. But I really I try and schedule things and meetings in certain ways so that like I can give a dedicated amount of time to whatever that is. Because when I can't, like, that's when everything gets really chaotic and my brain gets all jumbled. And that was a lesson that took me a learn.
We're the same person, man. I can't multitask. It's terrible. I have to like literally go fully into something, fully committed. And I mean, I don't know if you're this way, but like I get obsessed. I won't sleep for days. Like sometimes I won't sleep for days. I'll be working on something. It's the only thing that exists. There's no personal relationships. There's no sleep. There's no eating. There's no showering or the gym. It's just whatever that task is. And I know it's probably not the healthiest mentality, but it's how I'm wired. So I get what you mean by not multitasking.
Well, the only thing different about that is I don't function well on no sleep. And I used to be a lot more obsessive, actually. I've really tried to like, that's one thing about like being married actually, is I'm just a lot happier because I'm like, I turn off. I used to I could literally be in a dark room for days on end or doing exactly that. And then like at a certain point, here's the other weird thing that I realized is like all of that time that I might obsess putting into multiple days in a row, doing all of that, you get smarter when you have other people that you have to get stuff done. So I'm able to simplify the amount of work into less time that I would have spent just like I was like, I have to be in this mode. Like, and like, I realized like maybe I don't have to be in that mode. I could get there faster. Or if I go take a break and do something else and come back to it, I was able to do something else, and I came up with a solution while I was doing that other thing versus being in obsession tunnel vision mode. So that was something I found as well, but that might not be universal. That's just me. And and I certainly know what an obsessive mindset is. So I don't know that one is better than the other. I just know that I had to adapt because I got married and I've been in a relationship for a long time. And I'm happier. So there's that.
I'm glad you're happier because what you're talking about was giving me anxiety. I'm like, I can't imagine not like, oh, what do you mean? I got to take a walk right now? That literally, like, I was about to like fall out of my chair just thinking about something I have to do and knowing that I would have to take a break. I'm like, no, that can't happen. That can't.
But what might happen is like, if you took a break, you might like be able to like think about it in a slightly different way because you'd be in a different setting.
I know you're right from a logical standpoint, but like still my heart won't let go of it. I'm just like,
Dude, in the end, we all pay our own toll, man. We all pay our own costs, right? So as long as it works for you, awesome. Like, and that's the thing where it's like, I don't know, that's life where you have to in the end, if you ever study martial arts, there's this idea of one cut, right? Which is like, life is one cut, right? Every decision you make, it is one cut. And that is, you don't get a do-over. You don't actually get a do-over on anything in your life. You may get a second chance, but you'll never get to do that one moment over again in the same way. So what are you willing to bet your life on from that perspective? That's one cut. There is only one shot, period.
Yeah, I don't know. I just imagined you with a sword, like slicing bamboo and building a house with it. And I don't know, just like it was awesome. This epic in my head.
Well, I don't know how to do that, but it would be cool. So one day,
it would be
something
cool
to work towards. Yeah.
So hey, man, we're getting close to an hour. So we got like 2 minutes left or a minute left. Like, I mean, you were so wise at the end of this, and I'm gonna have to take a step back and really think about my life decisions. And I'm saying this with complete seriousness. You may think I'm being humorous, but I'm not. I'm like, man, I have some self growth I need to focus on as soon as I get off this call. You want to close this out? No, it's good. It's a good thing, right? Like, I mean, everything you're talking about, right? Like, you had an inciting incident, right? Like, we're both storytellers, right? You had like a meet cute with a person you care about, and they fundamentally has changed your life, right? And how you operate. And, you're saying it's for the better. So maybe I need this inciting incident that will force me to change, right? Like, force me to look at things from a different point of view, because I'm not going to, lie. I mean, we talked about this in AB. I'm a little bored with my mindset. Maybe some changing it up would be good for me.
Well, I'll leave it with this, which is, you either figure it out. The best advice I ever got from somebody was, he said, you either figure it out in this relationship, your next relationship, or never. Right. Mm-hmm. So when you talk about an inciting incident or whatever it is, if you identify there's a problem in your life or a thing that you're like, I'm not really happy with this, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results, right? It's not, if you continue to do it the way that you do it, it's not going to change. Like, you can be certain of that. The only thing that will change it is some crazy thing that happens in the outside world that literally forces you to change. And oftentimes those things happen. And from a spiritual perspective, we can talk about that at some point. But the bottom line is, if you're not happy with something, like, it's like anything else, right? Dude, if you found a workflow snag, how would you approach that? You'd try a bunch of different stuff until you figured out how to solve the problem, right? So why not approach the way you do workflow testing to, like, your day-to-day life?
Yeah. Oh, you even packaged it for me. That was a good export you just had, right? It just landed on my NAS server of my brain. I feel pretty good.
Share button, man. That's it, though. But, like, literally just your entire life is workflow testing. You just have to look at it that way.
Well, it's really incredible that you and I can bring everything back to editing. Like, at the end of the day, it's just like it all.
Dude, I spent way too many days in a dark room, so that's what I know, right? So that's content creation. It's Zen in the art of content creation. That's But look, I don't know. I don't pretend to be. I've just screwed up a lot of things, and that's it. That's really what it comes down to.
You and me both, man. All right, so we covered NAB. We covered First Amendment speech, TikTok ban, inflation, taxes. we covered everything. So I think that's going to wrap it up for this episode. Sam, man, as always, it's great to speak to you. It's even better to speak to you when we really allow ourselves to go off the rails. And I had a great time chatting, man.
Well, hey, brother, it was a pleasure seeing you in person too. Everybody I saw at NAB. Everybody listens to the show. Hopefully I get to see you down the road at some point. And yeah, man, let's all meet up, and Jace and I'll teach you how to play craps.
Yeah, well, you'll teach him how to play craps, and I'll just sit
Dude,
there.
You're gonna be an expert by then, man. It's really not that hard. That's the thing. It's you throw the dice and lose money, or sometimes you win.
Yeah, sometimes you win.
Art to winning. You have to. It's all about the vibe.
The vibes. All right, guys, that's gonna be it. So, hey, we'll catch you here next time on ELAV8 TV. Peace.